From the client brief to the final cut, here's how a commercial gets made. I'm Katie, I'm a video editor, and I've worked on these commercials. I usually come in during post-production, but I've worked on enough commercials and I went to school for advertising, so I know how the whole process works. Seriously, from the first client inquiry to the final cut, there are so many moving parts. It's kind of crazy. So in this video, I'm walking you through the full process of how a commercial gets made, what actually happens behind the scenes, when I usually get brought into the project, and how smooth or not so smooth things can get. I've broken it down into 11 sections. Hopefully that's not too overwhelming, but there's kind of a lot to go into. First up, the client issues an RFP or request for proposal. This could be for a full new creative direction or for just a couple of holiday social posts. You'll see in this whole video that the theme is like there's a wide variety of what could happen, so these are just generalizations. But yeah, it all starts with an RFP. Second step, agencies will pitch their ideas. Sometimes this can take multiple rounds. They're called tissue sessions. And this is work that the agency does for free. Pitches are notoriously gnarly. If you're thinking about getting into advertising and somebody asks if you like to work on pitches, think about that because there are pros and cons, right? It's one of those roles that's very high risk, high reward. So when you think about it, you're very likely going to be working very long hours, weekends, crazy timelines, and under a lot of stress. However, on the flip side, if you work on a pitch and you win the brand, that's really good for your resume. I mean, saying that you helped bring in a new client, that's huge. That's definitely going to help you get a raise at some point, especially if you've won a client that's going to be spending a lot of money. So after all the agencies pitch, one client is awarded the account or the job. Expect to celebrate because this is a big deal and you should totally be excited. And from there we go into pre-production and the process of finding vendors begins. It all starts with the director, the production house, the post-production house. Those are like the main vendors. Now this is where you start to see a million different producers. So I'm just going to outline who these producers are. You'll have an agency producer who works at the ad agency that won the account. This is the person that serves as the liaison between the ad agency and all of the production vendors. So the agency producer is their contact. So for me as an editor, knowing agency producers is essential for my job. And then you have the line producer whose job it is to make sure that the production runs smoothly, you know, however many days that you're on set for, that it all goes according to plan. And then you have a post-production producer whose job it is to oversee all of the post-production, all of the editing, and oversee all of those vendors, which we'll get into in a minute. During pre-production is when either the agency producer or the post producer will reach out and they'll let me know what the situation is with the project, the schedule, the budget, all of those things, and see if I'm interested and available. And then once we have all our ducks in a row, we go into production. Production can vary so widely from a day on set in a studio down the street from your house to a week or two on set in another country. Side note, not many people know this, but a lot of productions happen in foreign countries. Depending on the project, that's the theme of this video, but depending on the project, sometimes it's cheaper to just fly out the entire team to Slovenia than filming in Los Angeles. Now on set, there's typically a media manager or DIT, which stands for digital imaging technician. Now depending on the scale of the project and the turnaround time, you typically will have somebody on set creating dailies or proxies for the director and the client to review at the end of each day. And then once production wraps, we hurl ourselves headfirst into post-production. When I say we, I mean me. A hard drive or a footage link gets sent over to me ASAP. And now that I'm thinking about it, I've never worked on a project that hasn't been on this like urgent timeline to get me the footage as soon as production has wrapped. Typically, I'll get a drive overnighted to me. Everybody's itching to see what was just shot and they're excited and anxious and ready to get going on post-production. Now, this is like a little subset about assistant editors. Depending on how busy I am, sometimes I'll hire an assistant editor to help me right at the beginning of a project, typically for like a day or two. And here's why. The first couple of days of a new project, there are a lot more organizational, almost administrative type of tasks that need to be done. So that's things like syncing audio, creating timelines, multi-camera sequences, pulling selects, creating transcripts, that kind of stuff. And it's really helpful to have extra hands on deck because sometimes, timelines are always shifting and a lot of times a previous project will bump up against a new project. And so I need an extra person to just kind of get everything set up so that whenever my previous project wraps, I can just jump in, start cutting and be ready to go. This is really common. Once the assistant editor has the project set up, we are fully in the edit. Now, other editors may disagree with me on this, but at this point in the process, my clients are the agency creatives. So my job is to get the edit or multiple edits, however many deliverables we're working on, into a place where the creatives are excited to go show that to their clients. The people that hired them. The number of people involved in approvals can get gnarly, let me just tell you this. But for a standard commercial, here's who needs to sign off on every edit. You have the agency creatives. Like I said, that's who I view as my clients. They're like the first step in the process. And within the creative department, you typically have multiple teams. You have the immediate team of creatives. So maybe that's a senior art director and senior copywriter that were the ones that pitched the concept. And then you have their creative directors. Sometimes you have executive creative directors, group creative directors, chief creative officers. Like, there's a lot of hierarchy within agencies. And so depending on the project, it can go all the way up the line before it even gets to the client. It's a lot. Once it gets the stamp of approval from the agency, it's sent over to the brand clients. Typically, this is the marketing team, and it can be anywhere from just one person to 5 to 10 people. In addition to those two groups of people, you always, well, not always, but most of the time on big commercials, you have to send everything to legal. But if the agency and the client themselves have done enough pre-production and like effectively communicated their idea and been open and honest with legal about what they want to be doing, there shouldn't be too much of a shakeup. There's no reason to really be afraid of legal because usually they're pretty harmless. They'll want you to add extra disclaimers, have them on for longer, make them bigger, that kind of stuff. And that's just to save the company from being sued. So no one wants that. So that's kind of a who's who of who's involved with the approvals. Sometimes you'll have 5 clients that all want to put in their 2 cents. Sometimes you'll have just one person, but it's important to know the politics of it all as you're going into the edit, of knowing like whose opinion actually matters, being able to communicate effectively with these people, appease a lot of different groups of people. And so those soft skills are very important. I mean, there are a lot of editors that are so incredibly talented, but they're not great at people managing, and that's why they don't go very far in this career. Being good to work with is so important. So if you're not sure about who's who, I would first ask your post producer, and then second, I would ask the agency creatives, because typically you'll have a good rapport or a good relationship with them. They can kind of clue you in, because a lot of times, I mean, at this point, they've worked closely with the clients, and they can kind of anticipate their needs. And if you have a good relationship with the creatives, you'll be able to go through the approvals process a lot more smoothly. So then basically we go back and forth. We have approvals from the creatives, and then we go and try to get approvals from the clients, go back and forth. Like once the client have notes, go through the creatives. It's just a lot of back and forth. And depending on the project, sometimes it's links to videos and then just paper notes. Sometimes we'll hop on Zoom and do a live edit that way, or sometimes we'll be in person and just run through it in person, just literally at like an edit bay basically. Although the edit bay is disappearing in my opinion. So yeah, once it's creative approved, it goes to the clients for approval. And then like I said, we just do that process until it's finally client approved. Everything is good to go and locked. And it's rare to get on an edit session with the client directly. So in an ideal world, once the edit is fully locked, we go into finishing. It is thundering. Oh my goodness. I don't know if you can hear that. There are 3 specialists that just about every commercial will go to before it goes on TV. First is a colorist, and I think that's kind of self-explanatory, but the footage all needs to be color corrected. Usually this will take a couple rounds. Second, it'll go to an audio designer, and this is also called mix, you know, like audio mixing. Third is VFX or flame artist. You would be so surprised as to how much stuff goes into VFX. Not just Marvel stuff goes to VFX. For example, this commercial right here, this went to VFX. This shot right here went to a flame artist to add the logo back to the bottle. It's really common, especially in beauty. So in beauty, they have a lot of little retouching moments like removing a mole or a freckle or removing veins or like whitening the whites of people's eyes, which is so crazy to me. And when I worked on Acura, they would always send their spots to VFX to remove the drivers from the cars. You know, when you see the running footage of the cars, they would basically just like darken the windshield and stuff, but there's a lot of tracking and it gets complicated. So there's a lot of VFX happening around these parts. And then the last step is conform. Now this is the final step where all of those pieces get put back together. So color, mix, VFX, all basically get sent back to me, and I do conform, which is I rebuild the edit. And sometimes there are conform specialists that do this, but typically I'm the one that does it. And in this, the year of our Lord 2025, in this digital age, everything gets resized. 9 times out of 10, I'm cutting 16:9 footage into 1:1, 9:16, and 4:5. And sometimes there's like really weird specs thrown in the mix there, but those are the common ones. So this time for resizing is another chunk of time that's outlined in the schedule. It's where we go back and forth with the agency and the client to make sure that everything is positioned the way that they want it. The things that they want to be highlighted are being highlighted. Nothing's getting cut off that they think is important. And then we go back and forth until it's locked. And usually the resizing will happen while everything's out at the colorist, the mix artist, and the flame artist. That's like best case scenario, which doesn't always happen. Like I said, things can get cuckoo bananas and you just kind of have to work with it. But But once all the resizes are approved, you head into your final delivery stage. So sometimes an AE will help with this because, as you can imagine, there are a lot of files to QC. I mean, just think about it. For every edit, so let's say you have a 60-second spot, you're delivering a 16:9, a 4:5, a 1:1, a 9:16, all of those in titled and generic. Generic meaning no supers, no logos. So that's 8 edits for one timeline. And a lot of times you'll have a 60, maybe a couple 30s, 15s, 6s. It gets to be a lot very quickly. So depending on the project and where it gets trafficked, you can have a lot of different delivery specs. So let's take the example of that one hero 60-second spot in a 16:9, right? So I hope you guys are following. You have the one timeline, how you have 8 deliverables, right? A lot of times for each deliverable, you have to export it at a different spec. So when I worked on Acura, we had to make like 6 different links because it was going so many different places. So when I say that, I mean one folder will just be the ProRes 422 HQ finals. One will be a high quality MP4. One will be a low quality MP4. Some places that you'll traffic stuff will have limits on like the bit rate, the file size, that kind of stuff. So it just can get crazy very quickly. By the end of most of these projects, you will have hundreds of deliverables. So it can get to be a lot very quickly, and you really have to be paying attention, and you have to be the type of person that can hone in on details and be able to cross all of your T's, dot all of your I's. Honestly, the final delivery is oftentimes where things can get really dicey. That's because a lot of times the schedule will get pushed at the beginning, and then you have a compressed schedule at the end when you're supposed to have like 3 days to do the final delivery, and then you end up with just one. So there's a lot of stress and typically a lot of overtime. And you can't really push the final delivery date because most of the time there are media placements that have already been bought. So the brands have paid for these media placements that something is going to run. So the project has to be finished because they're placements that they've already bought, and they're not going to waste their money on that. One other thing to note is that there's usually a delay in the timeline of when you finish the project to when you can share it. And again, that timeline can vary. So for example, this project right here, this lovely little CeraVe project I worked on, I think we started end of October, beginning of November, finished it right before Christmas. I couldn't share it until like 2 weeks ago. Hilarious. So yeah, that is almost 6 months. Woof, And then there are instances where you fully, completely do a project and then it gets nixed before it's ever seen the light of day. Crazy. Usually that'll happen to social, not on big productions typically, like that's crazy town. I have heard of it, but social projects is where that usually happens. And there you have it. That's the process of what it takes to get a commercial through from the RFP through to the final delivery. You guys, I love making these videos, and right now there are literally like 5 people watching them. So if you've made it to the end, drop a little heart just so I know you're here. And then if you have any questions about commercial production, editing, what it's like as a freelancer, please drop them below. I know there's a lot of mystery around this industry, so I'm hoping to help dispel some rumors, help provide educational content for you guys. Yeah, and that's for you if you're wanting to get into content or into production. And that's it for me today. I will see you next week. Bye.